used to think betrayal was loud, that it came crashing in with slammed doors, shouted arguments, or breaking glass. But when it finally arrived for me, it was almost silent. It slipped into my life like fog, soft and unnoticeable, until everything around me blurred. My name is Clara Reynolds, and I used to believe that love was built on trust. I still believe that I just didn't realize how dangerous it is to trust the wrong person. It started with the faintest signs, the kind you tell yourself not to notice. The taste of metal on my tongue after dinner. The faint dizziness that made my vision swim when I stood too quickly. The headaches that came and went like ghosts. My husband, Nathan, always noticed before I did. "You work too much," he'd say, pressing a cool hand to my forehead. "You need rest." I believed him. I always did. We'd been together for 9 years. Married for 7. He was charming in the way people in movies are gentle. Patient. The kind of man who remembered every detail of your favorite things. When we first met, he'd shown up at my office with lunch, after I'd worked through 3 meetings without eating. That was Nathan. Thoughtful. Dependable. Steady. Or so I thought. By the time the dizziness became unbearable, I was 36, and at the height of my career. I'd just been promoted to creative director at Solstice Agency, one of the most competitive marketing firms in the city. My team and I were working on a multi-million-dollar campaign, one that could have launched us into national recognition. But as my body weakened, so did my confidence. I forgot names. I misplaced files. I'd walk into meetings and lose my train of thought mid-sentence. The stress only made it worse. "Nate," I said one night over dinner, pushing away my plate, "I think something's wrong. I can't focus lately. I'm always tired." He gave me that same calm, reassuring smile. "You're just burnt out. You've been running nonstop for months." He leaned closer, resting a hand over mine. "You need to slow down before you break yourself." He sounded so sincere that I almost felt guilty for doubting him. I saw doctors. I ran tests. Every result came back normal. Maybe it's stress. One said kindly, "You should take time off." So, I did. I started working from home, and that's when things got worse. The headaches grew sharper. My sleep turned strange, heavy, dreamless, as if someone had unplugged my body. I woke up groggy, disoriented, and yet, Nathan always seemed fine. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed my mind that made me sit up so fast, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Could it? I went to the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Nathan had gone out an hour earlier to pick up a few things. I stood there for a long time, staring at the counter, at the neat little rows of bottles and spice jars he used every night when he cooked. For years, I'd told people how lucky I was to have a husband who loved to cook. How he'd prepare all our meals himself, homemade sauces, fresh herbs, everything organic. I used to brag about it. Now, that memory made my stomach twist. My hands shook as I opened the cupboard, then the pantry, then the spice rack. Everything looked normal, too normal. But when I opened the small jar of turmeric, something inside smelled wrong, sharp, bitter. I don't know what I expected, maybe proof, maybe nothing. But I found myself scanning the kitchen like a detective in my own home. I opened every drawer, every shelf, until I found it a small, unlabeled brown bottle tucked behind the olive oil. There was a faint residue on the rim. I touched it with a tissue. It burned slightly, like lemon mixed with metal. I froze. The sound of the front door unlocking snapped me back to life. I shoved the bottle into the pocket of my cardigan and turned, just as Nathan stepped inside, holding a grocery bag. "There you are," he said with that easy smile. "Couldn't sleep." "No," I murmured. "Just thirsty." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "You look pale. Did you take your vitamins?" "Yes. My voice barely worked. You always remind me. He smiled again, the same warm, a harmless smile that used to make me feel safe. But that night, it made my skin crawl. When he went upstairs, I stood in the kitchen until I could breathe again. Then I quietly slipped out the back door and drove to the only place I could think of, my friend Emily's apartment across town. She was half asleep when she opened the door. Clara, what's going on? I didn't answer. I just handed her the bottle. I need you to keep this safe. Don't open it. Don't touch it. Just hold on to it. Her expression darkened immediately. Clara, you're scaring me. I'll explain tomorrow, I said softly. I need proof. That night, I didn't go home. I parked a few blocks from my house and watched through the darkness. The lights were on upstairs. I could see Nathan's shadow moving past the curtains. He was pacing, talking on the phone. I cracked the car window and listened, but I could only catch fragments, his voice low, impatient, the tone I'd never heard him use with me. She's catching on. No. I told you. It's almost done. Yes. I got it. The files are already transferred. The files, my breath caught. The project, the campaign, the one only I had access to. It hit me all at once. The sickness, the control, the constant reminders to rest while he took over more and more of my work. He wasn't just trying to weaken me. He was stealing from me. And if I confronted him without proof, I knew exactly how he'd spin it, the same way men like him always do. You're overworked. You're imagining things. You're sick. I drove back to Emily's before dawn. Shaking. She was awake when I arrived. Clara, you need to go to the police. Not yet, I said. Not until I know exactly what he's done. So, I made a plan. The next morning, I acted normal. I thanked Nathan for making breakfast. I smiled when he kissed my cheek. I told him I was feeling better. Then, while he was in the shower, I placed a small audio recorder under the kitchen counter, one that synced directly to my phone. And that night, I pretended to faint. As my body hit the floor, I felt his hands on me, gentle, practiced, efficient. He checked my pulse, murmured softly, and then, thinking I couldn't hear him, whispered, "It's almost over. Baby, just one more week." Then he made a phone call. "Yeah. She's out cold. The formula's ready. I'll send the files tonight." I stayed perfectly still, breathing shallowly, the edges of my vision blurring for real this time. When he hung up, I heard him walk away, footsteps, drawers opening, the sound of my laptop being unplugged. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just taking my work, he was taking my life, one slow dose at a time. But he had no idea that I was recording every word. The recording lived on my phone like a live wire. I listened to it once in Emily's kitchen with both hands clenched around a mug that had long gone cold, hearing Nathan's voice without the mask light. Bored, efficient, made something inside me split cleanly in two. Half of me wanted to drive straight home, shatter every dish he had ever cooked with, and make him look me in the eyes while I asked him what kind of man poisons his wife for a presentation. The other half of me understood, with sudden terrifying clarity, that men like Nathan do not confess because you ask nicely. They confess when the truth outnumbers their lies. I needed more truth. I began keeping a meticulous log that looked, at first glance, like a food diary and, upon closer inspection, like a map out of hell. Dates, times, menu items, symptoms, hours slept, who cooked, when I felt safest, when I felt like a mist drifting through my own life. I photographed every plate he served me, every glass he refilled, every spice jar he touched, with practiced casualness. I swapped my vitamins for identical-looking placebos and hid the real ones at Emily's. I stopped eating anything I hadn't prepared, then waited to see if the fog lifted. It did. The first morning I woke up with a clear head felt like standing in a room where someone had finally opened a window. The air was ordinary. I cried quietly because ordinary felt like a miracle. I made a doctor's appointment and asked to see Dr. Priya Singh, a physician in the same practice I'd visited before, but never met. I told her everything. Not the whole story. Not yet. But enough to make her lean forward. Her eyes soft and unafraid of the dark. I handed her my log and the recording. She listened without interrupting. Then said the first sentence. That didn't make me feel crazy in months. You are not imagining this. She ordered toxicology screening with a focus on compounds often used in non-acute impairment. Her phrase for substances that don't send you to the ER so much as make you question your own quality of thinking. She explained how trace levels can float just under alarm thresholds if the dosing is careful and intermittent. Some people call it gaslighting with chemistry, she said. And the words landed like a diagnosis of my life. I asked if she would document everything. She said yes. She printed a statement that described my symptoms, my recorded evidence, and the medical basis for suspicion. She used words like pattern, correlation, and probable exposure. She signed it, looked me in the eye, and said, "Do not confront him alone." That night I slept at home, not because I felt safe, but because I had moved into a phase of the plan that required the appearance of safety. I acted exhausted. I let him pour the wine but did not drink it. I pretended to fall asleep on the couch with my head heavy against a cushion, and my phone on the coffee table. Camera pointed at the kitchen doorway. I left the brown bottle with Emily, but I put a near-identical one behind the olive oil empty. Clean. A ghost. I wanted to know whether he would reach for a phantom, and what he would do when his hand closed on air. Near midnight, the house changed temperature, the way houses do when someone makes a decision. He moved differently when he believed I was unconscious. His steps precise. His breathing shallow. He opened the pantry. Shifted bottles. Paused. The camera caught his hand hovering over the place where something used to be. He stood still for a long moment. Then opened the drawer where we keep plastic wrap. Extracted a small packet of something grainy, and tucked it into the pocket of his sweatpants. He didn't cook. He didn't measure. He just stood in the dark kitchen. Phone at his ear. Whispering. It's fine. She's almost ready to hand over the whole deck herself. Don't worry. The deck. Morrison Renewables. Our whale of a client. A national rebrand with a budget big enough to change careers. I had spent months designing a campaign with our team at Solstice Imagery that made clean energy feel like inheritance instead of sacrifice. Copy that sounded like promise instead of propaganda. It had the first taste of a story that could genuinely shift public appetite. And Nathan, who had never set foot in a marketing war room, they was treating it like contraband. You move between pockets. The next morning I drove to a small precinct across town where Emily's cousin worked patrol and introduced me to Detective Ari Navarro. He had the posture of someone who had seen more than was good for him, and the kind of patience that makes people think they're in control of the conversation right up until they aren't. I told him the whole thing. From the fog to the phone call. From the brown bottle to the camera. From the recordings to the deck. He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask me if I was sure. He asked if I would be willing to wear a wire. I looked down at my hands and saw that they had stopped shaking. Yes, I said. I want to be done being careful. We planned. If Nathan mentioned the substance. If he mentioned the deck. If he acknowledged the dosing or the theft or the people on the other end of the phone. We would have enough to accelerate everything. Dr. Singh would rush the labs. Navarro would coordinate with the DA's office. Emily would be on standby with duplicates of every file I'd saved. Each copy time-stamped. Each folder nested inside 3 more. It felt obscene. Building a net under a life I had once called love. But it also felt like waking up on the deck of a ship after almost drowning and realizing with a strange and holy fury. That I could swim. At work, I returned to the office for the first time in weeks. My team looked up with that mixture of relief and apprehension that people wear when they love you, but your absence has made them rehearse contingency plans in private. I told them I was fine, which was both a lie and the truest thing I had said in months. I asked Zoe, my strategy lead, to lock the Morrison files behind a one-time multi-factor that only the two of us could open in the same room at the same time. I told Marcus, or data analyst, to run a security audit on external access attempts for the last 60 days and send it directly to me. I watched faces relax as I started issuing orders again. Leadership is a tone more than a task. It's the sound you make when you stop apologizing for being the person in the room who knows what to do. That evening, I cooked 2 plates, 1 pan. The kitchen smelling like garlic and rosemary. Nathan came home with his keys jingling like he believed the noise could make him seem harmless. He kissed my cheek and told me he had a surprise for me if I was up to it. His voice soft with the kind of patronizing care I used to mistake for love. I handed him a plate, poured 2 glasses of water, and waited. Better? He asked. Much, I said, meaning the clarity, not the pasta. We ate. I wore the recorder under a silk camisole, the wire flat against my ribs. My breath, a metronome. I let silences stretch until he had to fill them. I asked small, careless questions. I shook my head as if dizzy and said, I hate this. It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. He reached across the table, palm warm, eyes sympathetic enough to make me want to slap him. You're not losing anything, he said gently. You're just tired. After your big presentation, we'll go away for a while. Somewhere warm. You won't have to think about anything. The Morrison presentation, I asked. Looking up through lashes I had learned to use like a veil. He smiled. See, you're already worrying. You should let me handle the delivery. You don't need the stress. I laughed softly, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. You want to present my work. Our work, he corrected, as if the pronoun were a whiteout that could make my name disappear on the title slide. What about the files? I asked, tilting my head. You don't have access to everything. Don't I? He said. And for a moment the mask slipped, the smallest edge in his voice, the shadow of triumph. You forget how much I help you. You leave your laptop open. You trust me with your passwords. I kept my face steady as I watched the wire capture the confession I had come for. I do trust you, I said, and the sentence left a metallic taste in my mouth. What would I even do without you? He reached for my glass and refilled it. He was always refilling. After dinner, he suggested we relax. I said I was too tired, which for once was a kindness to myself instead of a concession to him. He went to the study. I listened to him pacing, then typing. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a message from Navarro. Stay steady. We're listening. I went upstairs and lay on the bed fully dressed. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the word almost. How many times had I almost told someone? How many times had I almost believed myself? How many times had I almost left? Almost is the lie that keeps you home when you should be packing a bag. In the morning, Doctor, Singh called with the lab results. Trace levels consistent with a sedative sometimes used off-label for anxiety. Also found in certain wellness powders marketed as sleep aids when no one is checking the ingredients. Not a dose to knock me out, just enough to blur me at the edges. Enough to make a woman apologize for not being sharper at the meeting, while a man exports her slides from a shared drive at 211A. Doctor. Singh had already forwarded the report to Navarro. I'm here, she said softly. Whatever you need. I am here. I hung up and called Maya, my boss at Solstice. I told her the bare minimum necessary to protect the firm there had been an attempted breach of our files from an external IP that mimicked my home network. We had already locked everything down. Law enforcement was aware. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, finish the deck in-house. Present it to me at 5. We'll move the client review to tomorrow morning. Then, after a beat, I'm glad you're back. I worked like a person building a raft while the water rises. I tightened the narrative, cut anything decorative, positioned the brand voice like a promise made by generations, instead of a company with a glossy logo. I assembled a closing slide that said, in clean white letters on a field of color that looked like a horizon, energy you can inherit. When I looked up, Zoe was standing in the doorway with 2 coffees and red-rimmed eyes. It's you again, she said, smiling. I missed you. At 4:40, Navarro texted, he's on the move. Black duffel, leaving the house. A second later, Emily, I'm parked 2 blocks down. I've got eyes. I felt the tremor start in the base of my spine and travel outward. Not fear. Voltage. At 5, I presented to Maya and the leadership team. When I finished, there was a silence that did not feel like doubt. It felt like respect. Maya nodded once. We go with this. 9 a.m. Tomorrow. You lead. Zoe runs support. No external devices in the room. If anyone asks why, I tell them because I said so. She stood and squeezed my shoulder. That rare touch that means, in some languages, I see what you survived and I will fight with you now. At 6:10, the recorder under my camisole lay on my dresser like a shed skin. I wore a blazer with inside pockets that lay flat against me. I was ready to go home. Navarro called as I was locking my office. He's headed to a co-working space on Harbor, likely meeting a contact. We're not intervening inside privacy laws, but if a transfer happens, the warrant triggers. What do you need me to do? I asked. Be where you said you'd be. He said, present your work to the people who deserve it. We'll do the rest. On the drive home, the sky was the strange bruised purple it gets when a storm forgets whether it's coming or going. I thought about the first dinner Nathan ever cooked for me. Lemon pasta with something green and bright. A laugh behind his teeth. The way his hands moved like a promise. I tried to forgive the woman who thought that steadiness was safety. I whispered, you didn't know. To the younger version of me who had never met a person who would rather dissolve you slowly than say out loud that he envied your light. At the house, I parked on the street and watched for a full minute before I went in. The front door was unlocked. The study smelled faintly of citrus and print toner, the scent of an office smuggled into a home. On the desk, nothing. On the floor beside the chair, a black duffel. Half-zipped. Inside it, a portable drive with a label he must have thought looked innocuous, and underneath, a folder of documents so sloppily assembled, it made me wonder if arrogance is just a synonym for laziness in a better suit. I didn't touch anything. I stood in the doorway and breathed. Slow and even, and let the awareness wash through me. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't the fog. I was the weather front. Nathan's car pulled into the driveway at 7:20. He walked in with that same harmless smile. A set of keys in one hand, phone in the other, and launched into a speech about a colleague who needed advice with a startup. How he was thinking of investing. How we could use a vacation when my big moment ended. He didn't notice the way my hands hung still at my sides. He didn't notice how quiet the house had become when I stopped pretending to fill it. Tomorrow, I said brightly, as if we were on the same team. After the presentation, we'll celebrate tomorrow. He beamed. Of course we will. I slept that night with the window open and the recorder charging on my nightstand. Somewhere past midnight, my phone vibrated once Navarro copy acquired. Sit tight. Morning is yours. I lay awake staring into the dark and realized I was not afraid of morning anymore. Morning was where the light lived. Morning was where I would stand in a room with my work, my voice, my team, and the truth, and I would not faint or forget or apologize. Morning was where the story stopped being about survival and started being about return. When dawn came, the city smelled like rain-scrubbed concrete and new beginnings. I made coffee. I ate a piece of toast that tasted like bread instead of static. I stood at the mirror and looked at my face. I looked older. I looked like someone who had walked through a fog and learned the names of everything she could not see, and came out the other side with a compass in her pocket. At 8:30, my phone rang. Navarro again. We're in position. If he shows at Morrison, he won't make it past the lobby. Present your work. Clara. We'll catch the rest. I hung up, picked up my bag, and felt the full weight of what I was about to do settle into my bones like a vow. The drive to the office was short. The lobby elevator mirrored my reflection back at me, and for a heartbeat I saw a woman from earlier chapters, a softer fear. A blurrier outline, and I reached out and touched the mirrored glass to tell her, without words, "Thank you for getting me this far. I'll take it from here." I stepped into the conference room with my team. The client arrived. We shook hands. The projector hummed. I breathed once, deeply, and began. The presentation began like every other major pitch of my career: bright lights, crisp slides, the steady rhythm of my own voice, threading a story through a room full of decision-makers. But underneath the professionalism was something new: stillness. Not fear. Not even adrenaline. Just a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The executives from Morrison Renewables leaned forward as I spoke about legacy, about the human side of innovation, about how we sell trust before we sell technology. The deck glowed behind me, each slide a fragment of the world I'd fought to reclaim. I saw Zoe in the back, smiling faintly. I saw Maya watching every word. And then, near the end, my phone muted. Hidden in my blazer buzzed once. A single pulse against my heart. Navarro. That was the signal. I kept speaking, seamlessly, while my pulse roared in my ears. Somewhere across town, Nathan was being arrested. He'd walked into the Morrison lobby carrying the stolen drive, using my name, claiming he was delivering an early version of the final deck. The drive had been tagged by Navarro's team. The moment he plugged it into the receptionist's terminal, the flag triggered, locking the file and alerting the police. I didn't know the details yet. I didn't have to. The vibration told me everything I needed. When the presentation ended, there was a heartbeat of silence, and then applause, polite at first, then rising into something that felt like a collective exhale. Maya met my eyes. That small nod again. It's done. The Morrison CEO stood and extended his hand. Beautiful work. Ms. Reynolds. We've been pitched by 5 agencies this quarter. But this feels human. We'll be in touch very soon. I thanked him, smiling, my voice steady. Inside, every muscle trembled with the effort not to collapse. As the room cleared, Maya lingered. You've been through something, haven't you? He blinked. Why do you say that? She smiled softly. Because this presentation wasn't about selling energy. It was about reclaiming it. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. 2 hours later, I sat in Navarro's office. The walls were lined with case files, the air faintly metallic, like ink and exhaustion. He handed me a cup of coffee and a thin folder. Your husband's in custody, he said simply. He tried to bluff his way through the arrest, said it was all a misunderstanding. Then we showed him the wire transcript. He tapped the folder. You saved yourself. Clara. You built your own case better than half the detectives I know. I looked down at the folder. What happens now? Fraud. Attempted theft of intellectual property. Intent to administer a controlled substance. He's not walking away from this. I exhaled. Not relief exactly, but something close. Will you testify? Navarro asked. I met his gaze. Yes. Every word. He nodded. Good. You deserve your closure on record. As I left his office, I caught my reflection in the hallway glass, pale, tired, but unbroken. For months, I'd been watching myself fade. Now, for the first time, I saw a woman who had come back into focus. The trial was brutal. Nathan's defense painted him as a misunderstood entrepreneur, a man driven to desperation by financial stress. His lawyer tried to suggest I'd fabricated the poisoning story to retaliate for the divorce. But the evidence didn't lie. The recordings, the toxicology reports, the video of him in the kitchen, each one carved another crack into the facade he'd built. When the prosecution played the clip of him whispering, "It's almost over. Baby." The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of his attorney exhaling through his teeth. I didn't look at Nathan. Not once. When I took the stand, I spoke calmly. I told them about the headaches, the confusion, the fear of feeling my mind slip while the person I trusted most smiled beside me. I told them about the moment I realized the only way to survive was to pretend to be powerless. My voice didn't shake once. The verdict came swiftly guilty on all counts. The judge's words were firm. "Mr. Holt, you not only violated the law, you violated trust at the most fundamental level. Consider this your sentence. And your mirror. 7 years. No parole for the first 4. When the gavel struck, I felt a weight. Leave me not the full burden, but enough to stand without trembling. Months passed. Seasons turned quietly. The Morrison campaign launched and shattered expectations. Solstice became a national name. And I became something I never expected, not just a survivor, but a symbol. People started writing to me. Strangers who said my story gave them courage to question the things that didn't feel right in their own lives. At first, the attention felt strange. I wasn't a hero. I was just a woman who stopped doubting her own clarity. But maybe that's all a hero really is. Someone who finally believes their instincts enough to act on them. I moved into a new apartment, small, sunlit, near the water. I bought secondhand furniture, painted the walls a soft cream, and let the place smell like coffee and peace. Sometimes, I still caught myself waiting for footsteps in the hallway that would never come. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral that loops back just to prove you can climb it again. One night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights ripple on the bay. I thought about everything Nathan took my trust. My health, my voice, and how, in the strangest way, losing those things forced me to rebuild from the foundation up. People always ask how it feels to forgive. The truth is, forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a house you build slowly, one brick of peace at a time. And sometimes, you build it alone. I haven't forgiven him yet. Maybe I never will. But I have forgiven myself for not seeing sooner, for staying too long, for believing love and harm could coexist. That's enough. A year later, Solstice held an anniversary gala, a celebration of the Morrison campaign's success. Maya stood at the podium, champagne in hand. "We did something rare," she said, smiling. "We told the truth beautifully." The room laughed softly, glasses clinking. When she finished, she gestured to me. "Clara, would you say a few words?" I froze for a heartbeat, then rose slowly. The lights dimmed a little as I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't plan a speech. I just spoke from the ache that had finally turned into strength. I used to think betrayal was an ending. I said quietly, but sometimes, it's the beginning of something truer. When someone tries to erase you, remembering fades. But memory doesn't. The truth stays. I paused, letting the silence breathe. If you've ever had someone take your voice, know this: you can always take it back. Even if it shakes. Even if it's quiet, it's still yours. The room was silent. Then, slowly, the applause began soft at first, then steady. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the life I'd built from the ashes of deceit, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. That night, before leaving the gala, Maya hugged me. "You know," she said, "your story's going to help more people than you realize." I smiled. Maybe. But I didn't tell it to help others. I told it to remind myself I made it out. She laughed softly. Sometimes that's the same thing. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine, real wine. One I poured for myself and stepped onto the balcony. The city was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. But it didn't scare me anymore. It sounded like applause, because the woman who once whispered for help now stood in her own storm, unshaken. And that, I realized, was the truest kind of revenge, not punishment, not destruction, but peace so loud it silences everything that tried to break you. If this story touched you, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-heart tales of strength, betrayal, and redemption. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Tell me in the comments, have you ever found peace after betrayal?